There were so many reasons why not. He was well known to be a disaster in the laboratory. J. Edgar Hoover was writing letters almost daily to General Groves saying, don't appoint this man as head of the project. He was suspicious politically, and he wasn't a Nobel Prize winner. And so some scientists were putting forward the case to Groves saying, well, you can't appoint Oppenheimer, he can't possibly command the respect of the other people because he's not a Nobel Prize winner. And Groves insisted. And Groves, as you all know, was not a man to be crossed easily. And Groves laid down the law, and he wrote to J. Edgar Hoover and he said, look, give this man security clearance. Now I want this man as head of the laboratory. Why? Why did Groves want Oppenheimer? I think there are two reasons. First is that when he put his mind to it, Oppenheimer was absolutely brilliant at explaining things. We can see this slightly later after the war, televised interview with Oppenheimer where he's explaining physics to the journalist Ed Moreau, and he's doing an absolutely brilliant job at it. And Groves was enormously impressed because Groves went to see all the other scientists and couldn't understand a word they said. And Oppenheimer was explaining fission, explaining how it might be used in a bomb and so on. And that's the second thing, that Oppenheimer, unlike all the other scientists, talked about a bomb. The other scientists talked about physical processes, talked about research, what research needed to be done, what we knew, what we didn't know. Oppenheimer said, we've got to make a bomb. And Oppenheimer showed a sense of urgency and said to Groves, look, it's no good having people in Chicago, people in New York City, people on the west coast of America. You've got to get them all together in the same laboratory working on the same task. So that, I think, is why, despite all the reasons for not doing so, Groves appointed Oppenheimer. He could speak clearly, he could explain things, he had a very quick mind, astonishingly quick mind, over a very wide range of things. And so, what initially fascinated me about Oppenheimer, which is his polymathic quality, the fact that he could be equally at home in French poetry, English history, Sanskrit literature, and also cutting-edge physics. That turned out to be exactly what was required for the head of the laboratory at Los Alamos, who, was having to speak to people doing research on implosion, people doing research on the mechanism in the bomb, Teller doing his research on what was called the super, and also having to field inquiries about, well, where are we going to send our kids to school and how we're going to keep our clothes clean and so on and so on. And he turned out to be absolutely brilliant at that. And Groves deserves credit, I think, for realising that he would become brilliant at that. And so within a very short period of time, Oppenheimer, and as you all know, this place here mushroomed in size over the 2 years, but within 2 years, the laboratory had done something really extraordinary. It had developed not one bomb, but two different types of bomb, a uranium bomb and a plutonium bomb. The plutonium bomb is a kind of miracle because nobody had ever seen plutonium when the laboratory started, and very quickly they were having to research the qualities of plutonium, and then when it was discovered that you can't... So the uranium bomb, as you all know, was the mechanism, the basic mechanism of putting two subcritical pieces together to form a critical piece is very simple, but you can't do that with plutonium, they discovered. And so they had to develop the implosion device. And all this happened remarkably quickly, within 2.5 years. And as we all know, at the Trinity test site, the plutonium device worked. They were so confident that the uranium device would work, they didn't even test it. And when Oppenheimer, they all gathered to look at the extraordinarily impressive sight of the mushroom cloud over southern New Mexico, and Oppenheimer said that later that what went through his mind when he saw that was the phrase from the Bhagavad Gita, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I looked into this a bit, and in most translations of the Bhagavad Gita, the word is actually time. The Sanskrit word in question can mean either death or time. And you can see there might be relations between those two concepts. But it's because Oppenheimer said that, and because that's been so associated with the story of Oppenheimer, we think of that phrase now, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." That phrase has become inextricably linked with the awe of first seeing an atomic explosion. In the original Bhagavad Gita, though, it's actually making slightly the opposite point. It's not to do with a sudden explosion. The point it's making is that if you stand back and see things from the point of view of enough time, then everything, as it were, gets destroyed. Everything becomes insignificant. But anyway, Oppenheimer said this, and so that phrase has now become part of what you might call the myth of Robert Oppenheimer. All right, now, so after the war, Oppenheimer replaced Einstein as the scientist that everybody knew. He was on the cover of Life magazine. He was on the cover of Time magazine. Everybody knew who he was. And he decided to use that fame, use that influence for what he regarded as the good. By the way, Oppenheimer was totally in favour of the Hiroshima bomb and appalled by the Nagasaki bomb. And also appalled at what might happen if there were an arms race between the USA and the Soviet Union. And so he decided to devote himself to politics. He hardly published anything after the war in science. He left his Californian positions at Caltech and Berkeley and accepted a position at Princeton, heading the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study, in order to place him on the East Coast where he could make the relatively short trip to Washington to take part in all the committees that were determining US policy on atomic energy. And there were a lot of these committees, and there was scarcely a committee that didn't have Oppenheimer as a member of it. And so for a while, he was the most influential scientist in the country, shaping atomic energy policy in a way that he thought would maximise the chances of peace and minimise the chances of an arms race and war. However, dark clouds were gathering, which were the clouds partly produced by the discovery of the amazing extent of Soviet espionage. When Klaus Fuchs was discovered to have handed over the details of the atomic bomb, it was just one part of what was turned out to be an enormous Soviet infiltration of political committees, scientific work, and so on. Even commerce. And that changed the atmosphere, as did and relatedly, the exploding of Russia's first atomic bomb. Those two things together completely changed the atmosphere, so that there was then an enormous distrust and fear of both the Soviet Union and communism generally. And people started looking into, encouraged